If you would, please, sir, take us to the early days after Sandy Hook happens. The trauma is fresh in all our minds. The president comes to you and has a discussion with you. I'd like to know what was said, the mood of the president at that point, and sort of what he asked you to do.
It was a combination of anger, sorrow, and overwhelming frustration. He knew that I had done this once before as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, passed the Brady bill and the Biden crime bill that had limitations on magazine sizes, the number of bullets you could have in a gun, et cetera. And he asked me, he said, Joe, could you give me a report within a month of a comprehensive approach is what we should do about gun safety in America. And, but I remember us talking about, thinking about, it could have been Sasha, it could have been Malia, it could have been my granddaughters they all go to school together. Finnegan or Maisie. I mean, it was, and I think that's what communicated to everyone in America. And I remember going up to Sandy Hook and meeting with all the state police privately who had gone in. And they were traumatized. They were traumatized. There's things I wouldn't even say here on television, how gruesome what happened was to these little first grade kids. And it just shocked the conscience of the country. And so it was in a context of sorrow, extreme, anger and frustration about why can't we do something about this? It had already been, Columbine had already occurred, but this one, because it was little children, there wasn't, all anybody had to do was look into Mark's eyes when he was on television and see the depth of the pain. And I think every parent, every grandparent could look and say, as my mother would say, there but for the grace of God, go I. This was not a rough section of town. This was not a tough school. This was a classic suburbia kind of school with middle-class people, and was like, my God, this can happen anywhere.
So you'd been through this fight before, though. You knew the terrain.
I did.
What did you think was possible at that point?
Well, what I thought was possible, was actually doing what is just common sense. Expanding the background checks as to who is eligible to purchase a gun, and to bring into play more simple rules relative to handling of weapons and just gun safety generically. That, because, you know, we kept the Brady bill up to that time and kept over 1 million guns out of the hands of 1 million felons, 1 million people who shouldn't have guns. And I had done a lot of research, my staff as well, and realized that there were people still able to purchase guns that we didn't capture the first time around who shouldn't have guns. People on the no-fly list, people engaged in, domestic violence, people who in fact had serious mental problems. And there's an outfit, Jim, called NICS. It's the place where all these records of people who should be denied the ability to purchase a gun, where their names are kept and the reason why they can be denied. And we realized that there were an awful lot of states that weren't complying with the law. They had records, tens of thousands of them it turned out, that weren't in this pile. So when you went into a federal gun shop, a shop that was covered by the federal gun control efforts, and you'd say, I want to buy this gun at Dick's Sporting Goods. They pick up the phone, they call a number, they say, I got so-and-so here, here's his background, not his background, here's the name, address, social security. Is he able to purchase a gun? Well, it turns out there were thousands of people who should have been on that list, but were able to walk in and purchase guns. So I just thought it was just sort of, to use the trade expression, a no-brainer. And there's overwhelming support for it. Over 91% of the American people supported expanding background checks. 90% of all the households in which there was a gun supported it. 80% of the households that had an NRA member supported it. The NRA doesn't represent their membership in this.
So you were optimistic.
I was optimistic.
Some people will say, you know, why did it take this horror of Sandy Hook before the president, the administration acted? I mean, even the shooting of Gabby Gifford, which again was a startling thing, a member of Congress. There was no legislation. There was no big moves made by your administration, by the Obama administration. Why? Was it that difficult a situation?
Well, I'll tell you why. If you look at the years when President Bush let the gun safety legislation expire, it had to be, in order to get it passed the first time in 1994, I had to commit that it would have to be reauthorized every 10 years. When it came up time to reauthorize it, the Bush administration said, we don't want it. And in the meantime, the NRA had even gained more power because they were actually passing legislation. For example, in that interim period, they passed legislation saying the Center for Disease Control could not keep records on gun violence in America. There were places where legislation was passed saying cities, counties, states could not pass legislation banning a certain the ownership of certain kinds of weapons, etc. So you had that seemed like a plethora of erosion that seemed to have popular support, which it didn't in my view, of lessening gun safety regulations. And so it was that environment. Secondly, in fairness to the president, initially we were overwhelmed with an economic crisis that was on the verge of a depression. We were trying to end 2 wars, et cetera. But it was, and we discussed it, and when Gabby was, and she's a good personal friend, when she was shot, we discussed it. The issue became, all right, what is the rational way to go about it? I started looking at it, but it wasn't until Sandy Hook that it was like, enough is enough is enough. Put together something for me, Joe.
Mention to me. Let's talk about that a little bit. What was the view of the White House towards Mention to me? The significance that here you have a senator from West Virginia, an A rating with the NRA, that he's the guy, and Toomey, a conservative Republican.
Pennsylvania, big gun owning state, my home state.
What was the view of the Manchin Toomey bill, and sort of why it was important that those guys were the guys that brought it?
My view was very positive. It was important for the reason that they, in fact, no one could attack them for saying they're against the Second Amendment. They clearly supported the Second Amendment, as I do, by the way, and the president, but they clearly were associated with protecting the Second Amendment. And what they proposed was common sense, because what happened since the Brady bill was passed, the plethora of gun shows, and I mean gun shows where thousands of people show up, and a large number of guns are sold. People became aware all the people walking in to buy a gun there, they didn't have to go through any background check. If they went across the parking lot to Walmart to buy one, they'd have to have a background check. And secondly, with online sales increasing significantly, people selling relatively large numbers of weapons online, advertising to sell, there was a whole new avenue to purchase guns that was outside of what everybody agreed should be inside a rational gun policy. You don't want felons being able to go out and buy guns, for example. Well, if you walked into Walmart, you couldn't buy it. If you walked into a gun show, you could, because you didn't have to have a background check. So they came along and said, look, we have a way to capture gun shows and commercial sales that heretofore weren't considered commercial sales, not being sold by a gun dealer, but being sold by someone who sells more than a gun or two, does it advertises the sale, or does it on the internet. And so it was a very rational approach. And I might add, it got 54 votes. Everybody said it was defeated. A majority of the members of the United States Senate voted and said, Manchin Toomey makes sense.
But it is defeated.
It is defeated because they invoked a rule called a filibuster, requiring a 60-vote majority supermajority in order to pass.
So take us to that moment when it goes down. What's the mood? You're looking up in the gallery, and there are all the Newtown families looking down. What's at stake for them? What's the mood of that hall?
They felt betrayed. That was the word I most often heard. I went and saw all of them who were there. They probably told you, I spent time with them. They felt betrayed. That's the word, betrayed. How could they? I will not mention specific names, but I could, because I don't have permission to do it. Joe, how could they vote that way? Don't they understand what happened? How can they do that? How can this be? I mean, it was disbelief and a sense of betrayal. That was the mood.
And when Pat May shouts out, "You should be ashamed," to the senators.
They should be ashamed. Should be ashamed. Look, we're going to succeed. I've been telling this to Mark and all the Newtown families and all the other people that I've had an opportunity to console or be with. Look what happened this election. Big Republican win across the country. But what happened in the state of Washington where there's, I don't know how many gun owners? Over 54, 55, 56%, given a choice of expanding background checks or reducing them, voted for a binding referendum saying extend background checks. Look what happened with Governor Hickenlooper. Took on a courageous stand, dealing with gun violence in the state of Columbine, where Columbine happened, and he won, restricting the ridiculous application of the law as has been in the past. Solid gun safety. He won, even though the party took a shellacking. Look at Connecticut. Governor Malloy, in a state where most of the gun manufacturers live. I know Sandy Hook is there, but that's where the gun manufacturers are. He was in a tough race. It was an issue. He won. What I'm telling you is we will prevail on this. I believe in the Second Amendment. The vast majority of people believe in the Second Amendment, but we believe in common sense. Straightforward common sense.
But federally?
Federally. I believe we will pass it federally. Mark
How do you
my
get
words.
to that point if it's only happening at the state level?
Well, what happens is it's the same way we got to it the first time around. It started happening back in 1988 in the so-called Biden crime bill. It was happening in the states. There was no federal mandate for it at all. We just kept at it. We just kept at it. And it takes time. It takes time. But this is, look, the NRA, they don't represent their membership. They really don't represent their membership. But the combination of gun manufacturers, organizations like the NRA are now up against Gabby Gifford and her husband, who put together a fora that raises significant amounts of money to make the case. You have a guy's a great guy, former Mayor Bloomberg, taking this to the people and putting his money behind it. So that it's no longer just now I'll be very practical with you. What senators and congressmen worried about, in my view, having served there a long time, wasn't whether or not the people would support what they were doing, but that so much money would be spent by the opposite. For example, when I wrote the first assault weapons ban and we did the background check bill and limit the amount of bullets in a clip, et cetera, back in the 1994 crime bill, I was running the next time out. And I went up and down every tributary, I'm not joking, in the southern part of my state. They're big gun owners because of duck hunting and I'd go walk up through these streams and I'd say to people, because the NRA put out notices saying Biden wants to take your shotgun. So I essentially went to where the sportsmen were and said, that's simply not true. Here's what I'm talking about. And when you explained it to them, they went, okay, Joe, and I won handily re-election, even though I authored all that legislation. But what happens is, up until now, you had the NRA come in with $2, $3, $4 million, and they wouldn't honestly debated with you, they wouldn't say Joe Biden supports background checks and our guy's against them. They say Joe Biden wants to confiscate your gun. Joe Biden doesn't believe you have a right to hunt. And Joe Biden doesn't have a right to believe you can protect yourself in your home. None of which is true. That's what happened. Now we have a countervailing force. And the other side is able to be heard. That's why we're going to prevail.
Mr. Vice President, give us a dose of reality here, though. What's it going to take to move Congress when a lot of people say the thing about the NRA supporters is that this is their religion. This is life and death. You spit on the NRA, it's like spitting on the flag almost. Yeah. What will it take to see real change on a federal level?
Just keep it. I don't think there's a single congressman or senator who serves in the states of Washington, Illinois, Connecticut, or Colorado doesn't understand that this is the wrong side of the issue to be on with the NRA. The NRA is losing their own membership in terms of support. You have the vast amount of gun owners saying, I don't want people making me look bad. I want them to have to be responsible. I want to know that other people owning a weapon, a gun, are responsible. It's the irresponsible people that make me look like as a gun owner. I own 2 shotguns. I haven't fired them now in the last, since I haven't had a chance to go out skeet shooting since. Well, that's not true. I did it at Camp David on one occasion since I've been here. But the point is that, there's nothing wrong. I support people owning hunting weapons and guns, but it is, I think the vast majority of gun owners, they don't like being categorized as they are when they associate themselves with the NRA. And I just think we got to keep at it. Just keep at it. Maybe I was a legislator too long. It takes time. It doesn't happen once. You just got to keep at it and keep at it. And the best news to happen is what spontaneously happened in this election, where conservatives won across the board, but rational gun safety prevailed wherever it was on the ballot.